Hi all, this is kingscrusher. I have another amazing game of Mikhail Tal to show you, who in many ways is a world-class kingscrusher and famous for his kings crushing. This is from the 1956 USSR chess championship, 4 years before Mikhail Tal became world chess champion. Now his opponent here, Georgy Lisitsin, is featured twice actually in the classic book by Chernev, Most Instructive Games of Chess Ever Played, in games 2 and 3. If you're interested, I recommend that book. So in this game, Mikhail Tal playing white against Georgy Lisitsin. But while we're here, who is he? Georgy Lisitsin was born in St. Petersburg, Russia in 1909. He was Leningrad champion in 1933 to 34 jointly, 1939 and 1947 jointly, awarded the IM title in 1950. He passed away in Leningrad. The Lisitsin gambit is named after him. That's knight f3, f5, and you play e4, the Lisitsin gambit. And there's a similar line, knight f3, f5, d3, called the Neo Lisitsin. So a famous player and with good achievements. Let's see the game. e4 by Tal, c5, knight f3, we have d6, we have an open Sicilian, g6, the dragon variation. Now f4, this goes into the 11th fish variation. Knight c6, we have knight takes c6, and now this quick e5, knight d7, e takes d6, e takes d6, bishop e3, bishop e7. So that's curious, you might think. Well, it's holding the d6 pawn. If the bishop went to g7, it just drops d6 here in this particular position. So queen f3 hits c6 now. d5. Now what white has done, and I'll make a note of this, is weakened black on the dark squares a bit. You see these dark squares? They're slightly weakened. If these bishops can be exchanged off later, what can white do with these dark squares? Knight outposts? Anything else? You've got to get you thinking about that. White castle's queenside, we have bishop f6, bishop d4. Trying to exchange off immediately, it seems, the dark square bishops. But no, the tension is kept. They're staring at each other right now, keeping that tension. The staring contest continues. h4, we have rook b8. And now actually there's a naughty little thing black is setting here, a little trap, that if Tal continued sloppily with h5, he would be slightly punished actually after bishop takes, rook takes, queen b6 hitting the rook, and b2. And this is highly unpleasant if he drops b2 here, as you might imagine. So after after h4, rook b8, we see Tal playing queen f2 against this idea. And now we have rook b4. And again, another little trap is set. If h5 here, again, there will be punishment waiting for Tal in the form of bishop takes d4 and queen b6, now pinning that rook to the queen. For example, this position is actually very, very pleasant for black. So we have actually finally the staring contest is over. Bishop takes f6, knight takes f6, and the rook is kicked. Queen b6 though, the rook's not going anywhere, it's hitting the queen. Queen's coming off. Maybe Georgy Lisitsin was a bit scared of Tal with the queens on. So will he be able to secure a draw from this position? Knight a4, rook b7. We have bishop d3 now. Knight h5, and this pawn looks a little bit vulnerable, as well as g3 here. Tal protects that pawn. But now rook e7, and it looks as though, hold on a sec, aren't these rooks just coming down this e file? Of course the bishop is guardian of the e2 square, but maybe later black can play bishop f5 and try and get rid of this defensive bishop and try and get a rook to the 7th. This looks a little bit scary. Tal's energetic here. He plays f5. You might think, hold on a sec, isn't there a fork with knight g3? Black actually played g takes. If we play knight g3 in this position, then there's f6 hitting the rook. And this is actually still, you know, black is doing okay in these kinds of positions. But white will have a rook on the 7th as compensation, as an example line. But, you know, black is not in terrible shape here. He hasn't got king safety issues. So he plays actually g takes f5, in fact. Pawn up. I know it's doubled pawns. We have rook e1, rook f e8, and now an exchange of rooks. But black still holds that e file. Now, this is where things get extremely interesting. Especially for a Mikhail Tal game. You might think, how can white get anything from this position? Can you guess what Tal plays now? It's the start of a big adventure. A very, very big adventure is prepared with this next move. And I think I remember as a child, I picked up a book once, which was an adventure. I think it was 50,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and I didn't know the name of the book. And I regretted never finishing the book. I picked it up, started reading it, and it was tragic. But here, okay, there's preparation for an adventure, a long one, a voyage. And can you see the first move? If I give you 5 seconds starting from now. King d2. Where is this king going? Surely not across dark squares. Surely. Let's see. Knight g3. King c3. All of a sudden, hold on a sec. The king's going to pop out to d4. Is it going to go to c5 after? f4. Black is up to mischief here. Bishop f5 maybe to get rid of this bishop, and then rook e2 and then hit this pawn. King d4, bishop f5. White has to secure the second rank, surely. It can't carry on the king's journey. And also black would have rook e6 if he wanted to stop the king. For the moment, Tal delays the king journey with rook d2, rook e6, knight c5, but isn't this encouraging black to go for this poor, vulnerable, disconnected h-pawn? Oh dear, what's happening here? This pawn cannot be defended. What can Tal do? He carries on the king's journey with king e5. Bishop takes d3. C takes d3, keeping the rook on the 7th, just in case after knocking out this pawn, this one's next. Now, in this position, rook takes h4, protects f4 for the moment. King d6. In this position, if instead of king d6, rook f2, knight h5 holds f4. So we have this sort of stuff going on, where black is potentially okay. So, okay, so after this rook takes h4, king d6. Here is where maybe black started to go wrong, in fact. There is some hope in black's position here that there's a potentially dangerous passed pawn here. It's only potentially 3 steps away. It seems as though in this particular position, well, black played rook h6 check, but it seems as though he might have had better prospects of at least drawing the game if he had played knight f5 check. And there's some clever stuff going on here. For example, giving up c6, rook h2, there's now f3 threatened. Remember, this is the most dangerous pawn that black has, potentially the most dangerous candidate. Now, if we have this sort of position, knight e3, rook takes g2, this kind of stuff is going to be okay, because basically the king can handle the pawn majority over here, and white, this is heading for like a draw, this kind of variation. But yeah, black maybe didn't want to. He was more concerned about the white king. Maybe he got a bit panicky. So if we just go back there, so that was a variation where we have rook h6 check being played. So rook takes h4, we have king d6. This is a really critical position. So rook h6 check was played. There's also, okay, so maybe, you know, the best prospect was for knight f5. And just to go just once more into this line, here, instead of knight b3, you might think rook f2. But this is a really clever point. If the king's on c6 where it's munched out pawn, f3 here is possible. Can you see why? If rook takes f3, we have knight d4 check. Then we just pick up that exchange. And this is good for black. So yeah, there was a hope there that black could have used his more advanced pawn in the position. But he didn't. He played instead here rook h6 check, and now the king is still very advanced in black's position. And not only that, this pawn is now a long way off from ever being a threat to white. That's the price of holding c6 here. We see knight f5, king b7, knight d4. While this pawn is guardian against the f4 pawn, this is not going to be a threat to white. And in fact, it becomes a distant memory now after rook f2. It's going to become a distant memory. It's taken off the board. So white's left with his trump cards now, the 2-to-1 pawn majority, the advanced king. And these pawns are a long way off from ever being a threat. Knight e6, check. Here, king f8 was played. If rook g6, we can take that and take here, and this is good for white. So we have this king f8. King takes c6, not minding even a discovered attack check. A discovered check here. Yeah, black's crumbling now. This is really an aggressive piece. The king is really an aggressive piece. And this was the theme, actually, the king as an aggressive piece, for why this is considered by Chernev as one of the most instructive games of chess ever played. For his book, anyway, up until that time. It has to be said, by the way, statistically, he favoured some of the positional players like Petrosian, that you might be, Capablanca. And this was the only Tal game in the entire book of 60, a collection of 60 games. But what a game. The king is really aggressive in this game. Knight takes c5, check. King takes rook e6. And now white just takes d5. These pawns are just so far away from being a threat to white. In the meantime, yeah, white's getting this past b pawn now. The birth of that pawn. It just needs to be herded through. Rook d4 cuts off black's king from trying to defend this b pawn for a moment. Check. And now this is going to herd through the pawn. Check. Opposition is created here against the black king as well, which frees the rook to go behind the pawn. How is black ever going to be able to try and defend this? This looks like an inconvenience at the moment. Now, using that opposition, we can kick the king back. Tal does that. Check. Kicking the king very far away from this pawn. And now, king c6 to support b5. Look, black's pawn is now blocked by two pieces, and this pawn is like miles away, and we've got the guardian pawn on g2. This is hopeless for black in terms of passed pawn potential. Rook f2, trying to knock out this one. It's kept, the guardian is kept, which keeps the lock and key over black's h pawn for a moment. But black does try h5. That's taken to at least get the f pawn moving now. But it's too little too late. b5, f5. So it's a race between the b pawn and f pawn. But this is a race which has already really kind of won here. Rook b4 is played. It seems if we look at this, if black had tried to get the rook behind the pawn, we just carry on. It's got the king's support here. It's going to be easy, surely. But with the rook behind it, it's even more looking easy. And note also the rook has to get out of the way here. Yes, there is a check. b6, f3, but b7, black doesn't even bother with the check in this position. He resigned here. In this final position, you might be wondering, hold on a sec, can't black queen with this check? Okay, that does actually potentially happen. f2. The thing is, white is first to get in killer checks, and it's actually a forced mate this position in short order after the check here. For example, if king takes, there's rook h4, checkmate. If king h6, there's queen g6, checkmate. If king f5 or king f6, there's queen g6 check here and queen e6, checkmate. If king f5, again, queen g6 check and queen e6 is checkmate. So it doesn't help, basically, the black pawn queening in the end. So the race has been won, but black, and also black, is getting quickly checkmated after queen g3 here as an example. Okay, hope you enjoyed that. Comments, questions, likes, all appreciated. Thanks very much.